Dark Souls has always been about light and dark. About the periodical ignition and fading of the fire. About us, born from its ashes to kickstart once more the cycle while seeking answers to what might free us from our shackles. Prolonging the age of fire or ushering the age of dark are two sides of the same coin, the duality of the first sin. But there is a darkness beyond comprehension, outside of the eternal cycle. Envisioned only by the worst dregs of humanity, it lies within the depths of the Cathedral of the Deep.
What do you really know about these Lords of Cinder, these supposed legends? Let's take Aldrich for one, a right and proper cleric, only he developed a habit of devouring men. He ate so many that he bloated like a drowned pig, then softened into sludge. So they stuck him in the Cathedral of the Deep. And they made him a Lord of Cinder, not for virtue, but for might.
Aldrich was notable when the cathedral was founded. Perhaps he didn't even exist at the time. Indeed, the moment he became powerful enough to be worthy of consideration, he was stuck in the already existing cathedral and forced to link the fire. So he definitely didn't hold any important position prior to that. He was just a right and proper cleric. Instead, the Cathedral of the Deep was overseen by 3 archdeacons, a position pertaining to the Way of White. This religious order was probably founded by Old Father Lloyd, patron deity of Fatherland and uncle of Lord Gwyn. Since the head bishop of the Way of White was also his apostle and a Fatherland royal, it would explain why Karim clerics have always considered him to be a fraud, asserting his Old Father title was self-proclaimed, perhaps crediting their own archbishop with dishonor. Not even his followers would remember his name, since in our day and age the Way of White has long since forgotten about Lloyd, isolating him from his own covenant, a forlorn soul with no place to call his own. Regardless of his legitimacy, the Way of White was originally founded with the purpose of delivering a constant flow of fuel to the flame in the form of humanity. The deification of Gwyn's kin was thus a deception used by its clerics to justify their worship in the disposal of undeads. Those branded by the dark sign were hunted down by Lloyd's cleric knights, while others have been sent to undead missions, never to return.
Undead clerics are given a mission to seek kindling. Kindling is the art of feeding bonfires with humanity. Through kindling, we shall one day be granted magnificent powers.
We have already stated that in his early days Aldrich wasn't the gluttonous, corrupted being we have been introduced to in the prologue. Quite the opposite, actually, as he once was a right and proper cleric. It was a taste for human flesh he had acquired at some point that would eventually change him. It's not specified how he became a cannibal, but we can assume that the burial rituals performed in the undead settlement might have pushed the rise of cannibalistic acts. Proof of this is the mad woman butcher at the Road of Sacrifices, who once back in the undead settlement acquired a taste for human flesh of which he took glee in partaking. Aldrich's piggery made him increasingly powerful, as feasting upon humans means also to swallow their souls. But his longing for flesh disfigured his own body to the point he lost all his human features, eventually deforming into sludge. At the same time, the fading flame started to become a tangible problem, as to that point the prophecy had not brought about any chosen undead that would relink the fire. Therefore, the Archdeacons of the Deep turned to Aldrich, as, despite his immoralities, he was the only being capable of relinking the fire. After all, he was not made a Lord of Cinder for virtue, but for might. We probably won't ever know if he saw it as his duty, or if he was literally forced to link the fire, yet he did, and therefore the world would deem him a martyr, and declare Saint of the Deep. Note that the definition of a saint is a person who is officially recognized by the Christian Church as being very holy because of the way he or she lived, whereas the process of canonization and ecclesiastical recognition of a saint is indeed post-mortem. His title persisted until his exhumation, while it was never used prior to his sacrifice, which at this point makes perfect sense. However, the reenactment of the linking of fire is known to backfire to a certain degree, usually manifesting in the form of a bane consuming those associated with the Lord of Cinder. Just consider what happened with the Farron Forest and the Profane Flame. In regards to Aldrich, I believe that his sludge-like nature triggered the pollution and corruption of the deep, better to be explained through the Japanese word kigane. It is a philosophical Shinto concept which indicates the spontaneous reaction to amoral natural forces. In fact, similar to Farron and the Profane Capital, the Deep was originally a peaceful and sacred place, but became the final rest for many abhorrent things. This could refer to Aldrich, who might have been buried in the Deep, also explaining why his coffin in the prologue differs from the one in the Cathedral, though this fact stays open to interpretation. In this context, the Cathedral introduced countermeasures to prevent whether there was in the Deep from escaping. Miracles were taught and rings bestowed upon the deacons to ensure they do not falter in their duty, a philosophy to ward away the madness beaconed by the grotesqueries at hand, while the Cathedral Knights ensured no one would come in contact with these monstrosities. These mighty armored fighters share many visual similarities with the Paladins and Knights of the Matter of Britain literary cycle, and by extension of the Catholic Church of the 11th and 12th centuries. Ropes, candlesticks, incense burners, and the cross-shaped cathedral itself are several other references, while the internal hierarchical structure is also of clear Catholic inspiration. Now serving a Cathedral of the Deep, the Cathedral Knights were originally sent by bordering kingdoms under the Way of White's influence or sympathy, and Lothric was one of these, as the great shield some of them use is decorated with the emblem of an old king of Lothric, a bold image of a great bird gazing skywards. This symbol has obvious ties with the cult of the Sunlight Warriors, which had spread throughout Lothric in ancient times. As for the mentioned Old King of Lothric, I entrust you the task of brainstorming about his identity, as it will bring me off topic. Since the latest cycle was moving towards its end, the Lords of Cinder have been unearthed in the desperate attempt to relink the fading flame once more. Whether it happened prior or after Aldrich's resurrection, the Cathedral went through a secession which would move it away from the Way of White, towards a new cult dedicated to its saint. Archdeacon Klimt was the only exception. Although he did also abandon the Way of White, putting his faith behind, he did it to serve Rosaria, Mother of Rebirth, whom he deemed a goddess. In this we can read a generic loss of faith towards the old gods, as people must have started to feel abandoned to the curse, or rather simply forgot about their existence. Therefore it's easy to justify Klimt's conversion, who simply saw in Rosaria a descendant of the old royalty. On the other hand, the Archdeacons Royce and MacDonald eventually chose to follow Aldrich, guiding the remaining deacons of the Deep towards the dawn of a new religion. Yet this did not happen upon Aldrich's miraculous resurrection, but rather over an indeterminable amount of time, which we can collocate between the unearthing of the Lords of Cinder and the subsequent abandonment of their duty. Upon his return, Aldrich was truly worshipped. From the appearance of some of the deacons, we understand that this acquired devotion inspired them to mimic him, and apparently Aldrich had himself the desire to share with others his joy of imbibing the final shudders of life, while luxuriating in his victims' screams. The items that give us this information are dropped by two unique creatures, known as Deep Accursed, which more colloquially translates as Cursed by the Deep. It's therefore plausible to ascribe Aldrich's influence to his affinity with the corruptive deep. A whole infrastructure was created to ceaselessly deliver offerings to Aldrich, based on the role of the evangelist. These teachers, all women, came to enlighten inhabitants of the undead settlement and sent carriers in the path of sacrifice. Among these human sacrifices were also many children, of which Horace and Henri were the only two who managed to escape Aldrich's clutches, seeking from that moment on revenge for their fallen friends. Despite his leading position, Aldrich was delusional with his throne. So while he ruminated on the fading of fire, he envisioned a coming age of deep sea, something that was never heard of before, and whatever it might be, it would appear as if to achieve the advent of this age, he had to devour the gods. Therefore he left the cathedral, leaving behind Royce and the other deacons of the deep to watch over his coffin and to await his return. He was headed for the Boreal Valley, where Pontiff Sullivan imprisoned Dark Sun Gwendolyn, god of the old royalty, in the abandoned Cathedral of Anno Londo to be fed to the Devourer. Archdeacon MacDonald followed him to Irithyll to found the Aldrich Faithful Covenant, which gathers those who see beyond fire to the age of deep waters, and pledged themselves to ensure Aldrich remains undisturbed while he devours the god, hunting down those who would trespass the ruined cathedral. It's important to state how the term devourer of gods was badly translated. In the Japanese description there is no indication for the plurals gods, as he is instead named the god eater, thus limiting to one the number of deities he ate, or rather was about to eat, because similarly to a snake, devouring a god seems to be a strenuous and time-consuming process. While he was slowly swallowing the god of the dark moon, he dreamt once more, this time of a young, pale girl in hiding. Note that, while it's common belief that this refers to company captain Yoshka, she actually describes herself as a prisoner of Sullivan.
The Dark Moon Knights were once led by my elder brother, the Dark Sun Gwendolyn. But he was stricken by illness, and leadership of the Knights fell to me. Then Sullivan wrongfully proclaimed himself pontiff, and took me prisoner.
It's more likely that Aldrich dreamt of Sister Frida from the painted wall of Ariandel, whose scythe actually has the ability to summon a magic copy of itself, while being a pale, young, forlorn soul of the painted world makes her technically a girl in hiding. But regardless of whom he dreamt about, the dreamlike occurrence taught him to use the Lythand scythe. Him being able to acquire knowledge through his dreams makes Aldrich a unique character in the franchise, and by extension one of the most intriguing ones. More so the Age of the Deep Sea, about which almost nothing is known, but yet dies together with its envisioner the moment he meets us on our ember-seeking path.